Welcome to another edition of The Need for Courage, a MU Center for Peacemaking production. I'm your host today, John Byrne, and with me today is Mike Murphy. Mike is the director of the Hanks Center at Loyola University, and among other things, works in the peacemaking space and has done a great deal of things regarding that in terms of programming, in terms of working and mentoring students. And I know you got a book coming out, which toward the end I want to ask you about. But first, Mike, thank you so much. And if you wouldn't mind telling our audience a little bit about the Hanks Center, what's the goals, the missions, how long it's been in, those sorts of things.
Well, the Hank Center is now, I'm glad you asked. And first of all, thanks for having me on. I really appreciate it, John. And the Hank Center, we're in our 20th year now, all of a sudden, and we're celebrating our 20th anniversary. And I would be remiss if I didn't, acknowledge the passing of our founding benefactor, Bill Hank, who, along with his wife, Joan, gave us a generous endowment that we fire our many endeavors on, and they were really involved too. And so we're going to name a lecture for for Bill Hank. But what do we do? Well, our job is to inhabit and cultivate the living tradition of the Catholic intellectual heritage. And so we have all kind of programming, and we support research to that end. Linked to the Catholic intellectual tradition, of course, is the Catholic social tradition, Catholic social doctrine, Catholic social teaching. And so we work hard at illustrating and performing and interrogating and studying those connections. So we have lots of initiative, lots of conferences and colloquia, sometimes some one-off events, but regular named lectures. And then we work also, with the Vatican a bit, and we try to work in public spaces more and more with regional, local and regional partners and the Archdiocese of Chicago and things like that.
Yeah, I know what heritage means, obviously, but when you say Catholic heritage, is it a study, the history of authors and saints? So talk a bit about that, because again, we understand the term, but how does it work within the center?
Well, it can go a lot of ways here. I guess if it's Catholic, you're going to do that because the word itself means to account for the whole. And I
Right.
think that really is kind of what it is. So we're showing how maybe it's St. John Henry Newman, that kind of scholarly approach where the unity of knowledge. And so you are looking at literary knowledge, philosophical knowledge, technical knowledge, historical knowledge, that the church has been so good at as an expert in humanity. And so we want to just be able to show a culture that might be amnesiac about such things, that there is a way of knowing that is multidisciplinary, interdisciplinary, and more. And I think that's what we model. And we see that, every time. We see it most recently in Pope Leo's, kind of tour de force encyclical Magnificat Humanitas.
Well, I want to get into that, and obviously the Pope has been very strong on the notion of war and revisiting, my words,
Yeah.
the just war theory and those sorts of things. And as we're recording this, I'm sure when we'll post this, we're going back and forth in this administration in terms of whether or not we're going to attack Iran, not attack. So I mean, it's so important now to have other voices than certain policymakers, and then not trying to make this political, but to understand that. And I think, Pope Leo, not only being a native of Chicago, but also an American Pope, he certainly seems, and you know much better than I, to recognize the importance of, I don't mean speaking out just to speak out, because all the popes have done
Yeah.
something like that, but to be very clear on how it to, as you said, social justice
Yeah.
and peace. So I think that seems pretty important. And I'm sure the center has discussed that and other issues, throughout a particular year or semester or however you guys are set up.
Yeah. We don't mind being political. We're not partisan,
Sure.
right? We like Pope Leo has recently said about this political dust up that's really one-sided. The Pope is doing what popes do, especially in the modern era, is proposing and reminding of theological commitments and ethical commitments. And so, of course, these run into what is, war. War is political, but it's so much more. This is life and death. And
Right.
so, the church, I think, is reminding people it's not perfect. We have some real healing to do, especially with the sex abuse crisis and cover up. But then we are showing, that we can also be, and more often are, the adults in the room. And it is interesting to me that on the just war theory, this is the most kind of credible approach. And you'd have and this is a credible voice. The Catholic Church is, Pope Leo is, Pope Francis was. It's a credible voice in the public square in international affairs as a non-political actor. But like, if we didn't have that wisdom, we would be bereft. So I think, well, I'm thankful for it, and there are compelling things to learn and know about just war theory and its misapplication. So that's set number one. Set number two is in the AI space, for example, where it is curious to me, all of a sudden, that the two main actors in this debate are like big tech, corporate interests, and the Catholic Church. And so where's the state? Like, it's a free for all in the state. So I think we live in very, very, you pray as a young person, may you live in interesting times. They're pretty interesting right now. And so, yeah.
Right, in spades, as they say. You do a lot of programming. Again, as I said, I do want to talk about the book you're working on, but
Yeah.
you had an event on campus back in March, Building Bridges Initiative, which, looking at the list of presenters and the roundtable topics, a whole host of things to deal with the relationship between politics and peace.
Yeah.
But maybe, since you already referenced AI, what came out of the various roundtables, and specifically the one that you categorized as peace, truth, and justice in the AI area? Again, you already sort of alluded to that a
Yeah.
bit, but what were some of the themes of the experts during that program that talked about that, and other things related to peace, of course?
Well, real quick on the building bridges, it's a 4-year, almost 5-year-old thing. We began it under Pope Francis,
Right.
and by the grace of God, Pope Francis was a part of it. Emile Secuda is an Argentinian theologian. She was rising in the Vatican, and we were joking around. We were just having a meeting on synodality, and we said, "Hey, can you get your boss to join us?" And she asked Pope Francis, and he joined us. And we had these 4 years of these really beautiful meetings with young people and Pope Francis in the Zoom space. They got millions of clicks. Amazing. And then he hired a guy to take over the leadership of it by the name of Robert Prevost, a new bishop who, of course, we know now as Pope Leo.
Yes.
And so now we had this, recently in February, we said, okay, we're going to do Building Bridges Phase 2. We had, talked to Cardinal Prevost before this. We had dinner with him in Wheaton, Illinois, and then he became Pope. There's a picture in the restaurant now. But so we we knew then, and we knew later, that Pope Leo's priority above all is peace. That's his kind of home platform. So we got together a bunch of people to talk about peace, and Pope Leo wrote us a letter of welcome for this event. It was amazing. Cardinal Supich was there, Bishop Cantu, other luminaries were there. I actually presented on the AI part and justice, and it was just after, John, it was just after that OpenAI and Anthropic deal with the Department of Defense and Pete Hegseth.
Right.
And Dario Amodei said, we'd like to step back. We're not comfortable with autonomous weapons. And really the technology behind autonomous weapons is the new, well, not new, but the development, the point of recursive AI, self-correcting, minimizing human audits. And so that's a recipe for disaster for, prudent defense, or weapons culture, any type of military strategy and, capabilities. That's a red flag. So that's what I kind of spoke about at that meeting, and others what other directions, with us from a similar vein.
Let's talk about the encyclical. I told you before we started to record, I come from the financial crime prevention space, and we certainly are grappling with how is AI going to be a tool for needed investigation. So in our world, you look at abnormal transactions to see if they could be moving illicit funds that could cause human trafficking or terrorism, that sort of thing. That we hire people to do that now, although there is a lot of technology behind the models already, long before AI. But there's a lot of challenges and questions in our world, figuring, are we going to be giving up the human element of overseeing the data to make in decisions that could be harmful unintentionally to customers or potential customers? So in our world, those are the concerns. Talk a bit about your center's involvement, as you just mentioned, in parts of the themes in the encyclical. Again, I'll stop on this point. As I told you before we started to record, my takeaway from Pope Leo's encyclical, from the summaries, I can't say I read through everything, but I certainly did look through the executive summary and some other parts, was that he believes, which I personally do too, that we need guardrails around these tools, which I think most people agree with. But talk a bit about that, because AI has such broad, it already is, implications for students that want to go or not go to college. Again, analysts, all those sorts of things. So give us your insight with the with sort of the Catholic reference that I know that the center is it's so important to you folks.
Yeah, it's a really, really good question. Very important to unpack. And the first thing I would say, I was born in Silicon Valley, and my dad worked in Silicon Valley. A lot of my friends and classmates growing up have been at the bottom floor of round two, not the Hewlett Packard years, but the kind of digital culture explosion in the '90s. And they've made companies, bought and sold them. A lot of tech, a lot of technical engineering experts.
Right.
And so you'd say, okay, on the tool of it, right? How can it help analytics? Well, it's an amazing tool, and I'm not a tech pessimist. And so right now, AI is crunching irrational amounts of data to create cancer cures and cures for type 1 diabetes, right? I mean, it doesn't sleep, and we've seen amazing things, but it's also engendering and crunching numbers on polymarket betting and on which aids compulsive behaviors and gambling that can destroy lives and more. So the church does think about it in this way. So in one sense, it's a tool, and a tool has neutrality. And so, like anything else, you're kind of like, what the Greeks, everything in moderation. So in one sense, a tech tool can be that. In another, it's not that at all, because it's a new kind of tool, and it's so this is where people are really drilling down. And the Pope is one of them. A lot of folks in the Catholic land, ethicists, philosophers, theologians were saying the Pope didn't go far enough. He was, he was saying, like, it's a balance. We'll find the balance. I hope that's true. But Pope Francis knew this. Pope Leo knows it, that the technocratic paradigm and the new technologies, they're not neutral like a hammer or a wheel are. The tech gets in our veins. And so there's lots of talk about transhumanism, posthumanism, but that if the best example is to just look at iPhone, cell phone use and addiction. And
Right.
so people have a screen addiction because why? They're getting dopamine hits, and they're looping. And the Surgeon General from the Biden administration really thought there should be the same kind of warning that we put on cigarette packages for cell phones. So that's where it's not neutral. Is it helping in crime detection and elucidating and illuminating patterns of behavior? You're damn right it is. But then, where's the adult in the room? What's the regulatory response we're going to have? And the initial responses are very little regulation, more of a Wild West approach, which is not going to work.
Yeah, that's so true, and I know that this administration doesn't even want states to regulate AI. Now, typically, you'd want a federal or central oversight of something like this, but because of where we are, and you can't avoid the politics,
Yeah.
given what's going on with this particular administration, you
Yep.
can't trust them to do that, because, as we both know, the grifts that are going on in the
Oh,
tech space, it's awful. And I've done lobbying in my life, so I
yep.
understand the point that these policymakers, not all, don't either know how this works or don't have the capacity or competence to put the guardrails around. So
Yep.
that's why you see the states and the various state AGs, suing the federal government. I know I'm getting off on a
No, I don't
tangent
think so.
here.
I don't think it get off at all, because, and I don't even think it's again, this partisan stuff. Like,
Yeah,
we're careful to say, but you got to criticize the administration. And I know Republicans and conservatives, that are as alarmed as any progressive
sure.
or liberal. This is not that kind of thing. What it is like it's the Wild West. You have everything from rare earth minerals and laissez-faire approaches to that stuff, and even things that are kind of that harm the justice of those in the lands where these minerals come from.
Right.
So there's very real ethics happening here that is generally objectionable. So yeah, I just want to kind of interject that.
So the encyclicals out there, people are, digesting it, making decisions on that. What are both the obligations of the Catholic Church, meaning folks like yourself,
Yeah.
in the center to continue to be part of the debate. So, since the encyclical that I know you've been involved in thematically and directly, what do you see as next steps besides the obvious, trying to put those guardrails in place? And what do you recommend people that are watching this, that might be students, they might be academics? What else can people be doing to ensure at least an informed and accurate debate about AI with all its machinations that we've referenced a little bit here today?
Yeah, I would say the first step is to learn what it is and to demystify it. And you're going to see so you have to know the kind of the technology of it, right? To
Right.
learn like, what is Claude? What is a chat GPT? On a quick aside, Claude for Anthropic, the company that has invented it, Claude has its own constitution. There's questions of agency in there. But before you get to the philosophy, you better just learn what it is. And their new feature, their new presence is called mythos,
Right.
and that's a culture that's a powerful mythos. Is that going to be the new humanism? So I'll stay there. But so you need to learn about it and not hide from it, and realize that it builds on on the digital age. It's not social media. But social media was a dry run, and we see how we failed and how it hurt us, right? Because it really broke down polity, peace, kind of, humane goodwill in society. So if we don't correct that and understand AI will hyperactivate that, it'll be on us because we were too lazy or afraid to face it. So, John, the first thing we do is we face it. After that, I mean, and Pope Leo is giving us a very digestible document to do so. So I think you go into the document and you pull out these kind of areas of it. And this is not a document, I hasten to add, and this is kind of a longer answer, but it's this it's a social encyclical. So Pope Leo is rehearsing and reviewing, reminding Catholics, but all people of goodwill, and it's very popular outside the Catholic Church. A lot of play. He's
Right.
reminding us of the church's social doctrine, things like the principle of the common good, things like the universal destination of goods, subsidiarity, solidarity, social justice, right? Dignity above all, human dignity, and the uniqueness of the human person. So, how refreshing, have study groups, right? Review this stuff, and then we see how AI relates to all these things and where the work needs to take place. That's what I hope in the first kind of phase here.
I like your characterization of the internet being the dry run for this. So,
Yeah.
because that's so true. Being involved again, lobbying in the 90s, it was clear nobody knew that this was going to happen. Well, I'm sure some
So
predicted what was going to happen, but many just turned a blind eye to it. I think that's pretty clear. You have a book that you're working on that's coming out. You want to talk a bit about that and what's the themes there?
yeah, gosh, I've been busy at it, but I'll tell you this. This one just came out. I'll hold it up to the camera. I'm not sure if this is on camera. It's called
Yeah.
Catholic Cosmotechnics in the Age of AI. This is a group written text, which I've never done before.
Oh,
But
wow.
but there are let's see, two, four, seven of us, and the Vatican got wind of it. We got invited to these prep meetings at with Silicon Valley the same weekend that the encyclical was released. I was not able to go to that event, but we were close.
Yeah.
But anyway, this is all about kind of how a Catholic anthropology responds to the demands and the challenges raised by artificial intelligence, and really proud of it. And what we come up with, it's not because there's this book, the Benedict option,
Right.
which is like it's not run away, but when if society and culture were falling apart, the monks went up and held ground in monasteries. Now, that's what the Benedictines did, but it wasn't like, there was some siege to that, but I'm not that way. This book's not about that. It's about engaging this moment. And so we offer, by the same token, spiritual reminders that we need to have a little asceticism and self-mastery and discipline that our spirituality has been good at to live today, right? A lot of the slop that we see, like just passive people, just being their humanity being drawn away from them, screen addictions,
Right.
pandemical amounts of loneliness, and just doom scrolling. It's like the time is now to say, "Hey, wake up, be back in your body, right? and in the way that, that God has made us, the way that the church understands it. And so we talk a lot about that, but we're also very savvy on the tech.
What are some of the recommendations? Because it's
Yeah.
I don't want to say it's easy to make those
Yeah.
challenges because it's not easy, but I know we both know what some schools are doing to make
Yep.
sure kids don't have phones during class. That's a super positive. But because it's so much out there already, what are some of the other recommendations, high level in the book?
Yeah, they kind of go along that line, and some of them really are this dry run of social media. I have kids that were growing up as social media was,
Same.
and I lament some of the things that we let them do, but more even the schools, like one-to-one laptop. Like we just kind of said, okay, the newest thing, go and go and go, and the results have not been good. And
Right.
so I think the practices are is to wake up and to say, this is there are different corrosive effects from relating with these technologies. And so there has to be a sense of kind of sobriety about it, and it just a sense of knowing, with anything powerful, you must respect it, right? I teach, I have a literary training. I'm first a literary scholar, and I used to always teach about dystopian fiction. Now I don't like to teach about it so much because it's too real. But
Right.
I do teach Frankenstein, and Frankenstein just reminds us of what people do in the face of a powerful technology and how awesome it is. And Victor ran away. Frankenstein made something amazing and had no idea what to do with it. So he made it alone in the dead of night, visiting graves, not talking to his experts, not talking to anybody who might have a better idea. And then he gave it to the world and he ran away. So we should learn something from that with this technology.
So the book that's out, you have another one that you're working on separately?
I'm working. My other is I work on the Catholic imagination, so I'm doing something on fiction, poetry, and film. But
Okay.
a lot of my work is on the last things I've written have been a lot on Marshall McLuhan, a media theorist,
Yes. Yeah.
and Rene
Medium is the
Girard.
message, right? Yeah.
Yeah. So
Yeah.
and McLuhan is a prophet for this age. I mean, he was a Catholic. He was a convert.
Right.
And all of his work from most of it, if not all really, but he's the guy to look at. He predicted most all of this that we see before us. And as a Catholic, he has a lot of things to say about how best to navigate it. But this stuff he wrote 60 years ago is as fresh as ever.
And some have also said that people should reread Fahrenheit 451 and
Yeah. All those
Orwell, all the typical ones I'm sure you talk about in class.
Well, you're gonna get me on that because these guys are these women and men, these writers. What it just reminds me of how powerful the imagination is. And in our Jesuit context here, Loyola Chicago, Marquette, like Ignatius of Loyola, one of his main
Right.
things to pray was the imagination. So we just you marvel at the writers that see over the next hill, right? And they remind us what the arts can do and the wisdom of the arts.
We're going to link to the center. We're going to link to these books that you referenced, but get you out of here on a broad question. The Center for Peacemaking, the challenges of mentoring students. The student base is growing, so that's really positive. Pat Kennelly's done a great job with the center and all the different machinations. They work with local issues in Milwaukee. They work with global issues, all related to peacemaking, peace studies, and all the things that you folks are working on. Two questions, I guess. One is, what's the best way for any of us to mentor the next couple of generations, hopefully? And what are some of the major, I don't want to say challenges, what are some of the main things that you've seen talking to students that get them engaged in terms of directing their careers, whether they want to be an engineer or a professor or what have you, to recognize that ethics and
Mm.
peacemaking is a relevant part of whatever we do.
Well, those are great questions, and I think I'll take a stab at the last one you asked first. I am partial to the liberal arts, but I'm also partial to excellence and scholarship in specialties. But my neighbor's a healthcare consultant, and I was at a party with him, just last year, and he said, "Mike, send some Loyola grads our way. We're a great public health university." I'm like, "Oh, you want some public health people, nurses? What do you want?" He's like, "No, no, no, no. I want your humanities people." And I said, "I think I know why, but why?" He's like, "They're the only ones that can write, but more
Right,
importantly, the only ones that can stitch together unlike things. They
right.
see connections." So I think, and you could be a liberal artist working in something specialist, but so I tell them, don't be afraid of being educated in this way and taking these core classes. You're gonna benefit by them one day. As far as what young people can do and how we can help them, I have never been more sure of this until, just thinking about it recently. And I always tell my daughters, you got to put your body where your values are. Because I noticed that people will, especially young, will type, they support something and post it on social media. And that's fine. That could be an enrichment or a help, but it's not the same as standing up and being present to something, standing up, being present to someone, uh, you know, being with somebody, accompanying them, but also being with them as you take on injustice. So, and I think the students, they know that because they're humans. And when they hear someone say it, they do sit up in their chair. And when they see someone do it, their example, they will follow in kind. And next thing you know, I think we're on the kind of the tip of a spear of a revival and a restoration. And again, is it political? Yeah. Is it partisan? I don't think so. But people want to engage about being, the best kind of democracy we can be, and to be smart about it, and to be caring about it. So I have a lot of hope. But at this moment in time, I'll tell you, John, like it's pretty challenging. But we have to turn into it. And I think Pope Leo is helping us, and he's standing with us. So we all turn in together from a very great tradition, intellectual, social, smart, and it's courageous. And I love the title of your show.
That's a good way to close this out. Mike Murphy is the director of the Hanks Center for Catholic Intellectual Heritage at Loyola University of Chicago. We will again link to the production of some of the articles and the book that you referenced. Also, really appreciate the work that you're doing. It's consistent with what Marquette is attempting to do here, and I think the more I do these interviews, the more optimistic I become because, frankly, living in the DC area, not because you have to be here to know what's going on, but it is certainly frustrating to see all the noise and all the issues. But when you meet people that are spending their time and energy doing these things, and of course, what Pope Leo has been very vocal about, it does give you hope. So, Mike, I really appreciate your time today. Thank you so much, and stay safe.
Thanks for the opportunity, John. Thank you.